Am I audible?
Yes, Chamali.
Okay. Thank you. And really sorry for the trouble. So once again, hello everyone and good evening. Welcome to the Innovate with Ballerina competition workshop. We are thrilled to have you join us today for this exciting session on Introduction to Ballerina and Backend Integration. A big thank you to our main sponsor, WSO2, for making this event possible. And we have two amazing speakers with us today. First, we have Mr. Tharmigan, a senior software engineer at WSO2. And alongside him, we have Ms. Asma Jabir, a technical lead at WSO2. So without further ado, let's dive right into the workshop. I'll hand it over to Mr. Tharmigan and Ms. Asma Jabir to continue the session.
So thank you. So let me share the screen first before I begin. Yeah, hope you can see my screen, right? So let me know if anything goes wrong in the middle. So hello everyone, welcome to the first workshop of Ballerina. So, and my name is Asma, and I'll be conducting this session today along with Tharmigan, who is also a member in our Ballerina team. So just a quick recap on what we learned during the previous awareness session. So there we covered about what is Ballerina and its key features, the way you code with it, just a brief introduction, and the graphical editor, and also what is expected in this hackathon. So for the next couple of hours, we'll be learning about how we can get started with Ballerina by installing it, and also we'll learn about the basics of the backend development and how Ballerina can solve integration problems very easily. And we'll also show you where you can access the learning materials and also where you can reach for support while you're developing your Ballerina project. And we'll give you the example case studies that you can use for your hackathon project. And then we will be, the main part of the session is the hands-on session, which will be conducted by Jabir. So let's get started with Ballerina. So I think you all got the prerequisites to download and install all the necessary things that is used to Ballerina. It's quite simple. You need to download and install Visual Studio Code. So if you have not done already, do it with me now. So, can you see the screen? Can you see my browser screen?
Yes.
Okay, so you can see Visual Studio, right?
Yes.
So you can download Visual Studio Code according to your operating system. So mine is Mac. I have already downloaded and installed it. And next, you can install Ballerina. So for that, you can go to the Ballerina page. The downloads page is this. Hope all of you have the link. Let me share the link also on the chat. So go to the Ballerina downloads page and download the latest version, which is Swan Lake Update 10. And you have multiple installers according to your OS. And mine is Mac OS, so I'm downloading the Mac OS one. And along with that, we also have to install the Ballerina Visual Studio Code extension as well. Okay, so mine got downloaded. Let me show you my desktop screen. Okay. So this is the screen you will get. So you will get a similar screen if you're on other OSs, and then you just have to keep continuing it. So I have already added it actually. and you have to give install software. And if you are a Windows user, you might be asked for permissions. Give permissions for everything, and at the end you will be asked permission for OpenJDK as well. Give permission for that as well, and the installation should be successful. So to check and verify the installation, you can run the bell-v command and see what the output is. Let me stop sharing and reshare. The terminal is not working. Give me a second, guys. I'm having trouble in sharing the screen again. Yeah. Okay, so let me open Visual Studio Code itself, and we get a terminal on Visual Studio Code. I'll make the, let's open a new terminal here, and then if you have installed Ballerina, you can run bell-v, and then this is the output that is expected to be there. So if you get any other error or anything, please try uninstalling and reinstalling. It usually works the second time at least. But this issue usually comes to the Windows users if you have installed it using the administrative privileges. So make sure you use it. You don't give that administration privileges. Okay, so once you open the Visual Studio Code, now let's go and install the Ballerina plugin as well. So you can go to the extensions, search for Ballerina, then you will get Ballerina language as well. So you can simply go and just uninstall for now and show you. You just simply click the install button and then it will be installed. So let me close and reopen VS Code. Okay. So next up, so once you have installed the Ballerina VS Code plugin and also the main distribution, now let's write the first Ballerina program and see how the content is generated and what the content looks like. So again, open the terminal and I'm going to create a new directory for the workshop. And go into this directory and then now I am going to execute the bell new command, which will create a new project with a sample code for us. Bell new chat as well. Okay. So when you press the enter button, you will get this message saying created new package. And now we can open this on VS4. So I am using the terminal to open up the VS Code. You also can just go and open it through the file. So this is the file structure you get when you open it. You get a .dev container JSON file and .digno file. These are not required for us. The main files are the Ballerina normal file and the main bal file. So this holds the package meta information, meaning then it gets generated with the default of name, the package name, and also a version and the distribution it got created from. And this part is also not that required for us. So let's go through the code in the main function. So like you can see, we have a simple hello world function generated by the Ballerina CLI. So let's just go ahead and run this and see. So again, open the terminal and go to the directory that the project is created. So this is the project directory. And then just to verify, we have the Ballerina normal and the main bal file. And here we can run the program using the bal run command. Okay, so this is what we get. So this is basically what a simple Ballerina program looks like. And as you can see, it gives you all the completions as well. Let's say you want to write another function. You get all the solutions you need for that. So if I'm going to give another main function, since we already have one, we get an error. And so we can change the name and then continue code. So it has an intuitive editor like this. So it would be easy for you when you start coding. Okay, so let's quickly go through about the basics of the backend development and how Ballerina becomes handy in developing your backend for your hackathon. Okay. Share properly. Yeah, hope you can see it. Okay, so when you get an application, it mainly has two components into it, the front end and the back end. So the front end consists of the web application or the mobile application that you're writing, and the back end is the business logic that we are writing. So in the back end, it mainly handles the business logic, and also apart from that, it also manages the database, the data or the data storage. Also, it will be integrating with other third-party services or the components of the same backend architecture, and to give the meaningful information to the user. So the one of the main ways of communicating between the services and also with the database and the third-party services is through the REST API. So what is meant by REST API is that it allows you to perform operations like creating, retrieving, updating, or deleting the data or information using requests and response. So a service can send a request to another service, a database, or a third-party API, and then that API will send a response. And based on that, we can do some business logic and provide data to the front end. So there are multiple components in a REST API request and also in a REST API response. So let's walk through all of them. So when we take an API request, there will be an endpoint which consists of a base path and the resource path. So when we take this example, if we take http api example.com/users, it could be the base path, or else the one beginning from example.com be the base path, and then the rest would be the resource paths. Sorry. And then we would have methods when sending a request. So it could be of type the get, post, put, or delete in common. So get API is used to retrieve data from server, like getting user information or yes, basically to get user information. And in get request, you just simply say like this. So API example.com users 123. If you send this request, it will give the information of the user back to you. And in the post request, also you can retrieve data, or else you can use it to create a new user, and also it can be do any updations to the server as well. And it also can be used to fetch some data in case that you need to send some information, so that the API has to, or API of the service has to process it based on the input, and then it has to give you back data. So in that case, we use the post method. And then if you want to remove some data from the server, like deleting a user, then we usually use the delete method. But it also can be done with post as well. And again, if you want to update some existing data, the usual method that we use is the put method. And optionally, you can send query parameters in an API request, which means you can send some you can send some information, filters, or search data. Let's say you have a database of users, each with having a distinct role, like an admin or a normal user or a DevOps. And then let's say you want to filter out the users who are in the admin role, then you can send a query parameter. The way you send the query parameter is adding a question mark at the end of the endpoint, and then giving it as a key value pair. So the the key role has to get the value admin. So this will give you the filtered information back to you. And another part is the headers. So which means when you're sending a request, you can send authentication information, authorization information, and cookies, the type of content, the type of the data format that you're sending. Let's say if it is a post request, you're sending you're going to update the database with a new user. So you're sending this content as an XML or JSON that will be captured by this header content tag. So likewise, there are multiple number of headers. You can add custom headers as well. This is a common part of the API request as well. And then optionally, you can send a body or a payload with the request. So this is usually in get request, we don't send any payloads on the body, but this is required to send in post and put methods. So like I said, when you want to update the database, when you're sending the user information, you send it in the body of the request. So if we take an example request, this is how a request looks like. So I have used the curl command to show you. So curl is a commonly used tool to send requests and get responses, just like Postman and the web browser. So in this curl request, like you can see, this request contains a post method. So this is a post request, and then you have the base part, the endpoint part of it. So endpoint can be split into the base part and then the resource part, and then split by the question mark. We have the query parameter role equals admin, and then we have given the content type as application JSON. Since it's a post request, the body is required here, so it is given by -d, the payload, and here we are sending a JSON, and so the content type is set to application JSON. So these are the components of a request when we are working with REST APIs. Okay, and now let's check what are the components of an API response. So when you send a request, once the service processes the request and get some do the backend logic, it will sends you back an information, the result of the API request processing. So when we get the response, we get a status code, mainly indicating what happened to the request basically. So if the request was successful, we usually send a 200 OP. So these are the standard status codes that are usually used. Uh, so when we are implementing APIs or services, this has to be considered, and after processing the request, we have to make sure that these status codes are sent properly. But then in Ballerina, in most of the cases, this is derived for you, and also so it would be easy for you to code with Ballerina. So if the request is successful, it will we respond with a 200, okay. And also we have multiple other response type, like if the resource is not found, it will give a 404 not found. And if there's a error on the server side, like the database is down, then we return a 500 internal server error. And also if we have sent a invalid request, let's say where a JSON is requested, we send a XML, or else there's a missing element in the JSON. So at that point, the request, the information that we are sending, the body we are sending is invalid. At that time, we say the service would respond with a 400 bad request. And also in the content type also it has headers. So let's say the response is responding you when you're requesting user information, it gives you back the user information in a specific data format, like application JSON, or it can be text or XML. So the response also contains the header indicating the content type of the response data. And also there's a body, which is the actual data that is returned by the server. So just to show you some example of the request. So let's say you want to fetch some details about a specific user, you send a GET request. So you send the curl command or the API request indicating the ID of the user that you want. And then you can also additionally give the role as admin. And so the response would be, if the user could find, if the service could find your find the user information, it will respond with the 200 OK status code, and then you will see the application type as JSON, and also the actual data, the data about the user with the ID, name, and the email. So if the user is not found, it may respond with a 404 not found. And in the post request, as I said, we have to give the actual body and also the content type header. So here we are trying to add a user. So we give the name and the email, the actual data in the format of JSON, and also we have set the content type, and the response would be, if it is added, it is going to respond with the 201 created, and then also it will give the, and in this API this can be controlled by the user. So here we are responding back with the user information additionally with the ID added to it. So similarly, in a put request, you mention it as put here with the API request, and then here we are going to update the user information of 123 with the role, with the new role. So once it is done, it will respond with 200 OK, and also the updated information is sent back to the user. Again, this is optional. This can be controlled by the person who is implementing the backend service. If the user wants to simply send a message saying updating successful, then we can just send that message and be done with it. And an example of the delete request would be deleting a user from the database. So here we give the keyword delete, the method, and then we say to remove this 123 user, and then if it is successful, it will give a 200 OK, and in the body we are sending simply the message that the user is deleted successfully. So let's say the database is down at this moment. This could we can write the services to return 500 OK in the response. Okay, So when we are writing REST APIs, we can additionally also generate a Swagger or an OpenAPI specification for the service that we are writing. So what is meant by Swagger or an OpenAPI specification is that it describes your REST API, the interface of your service, so that it can be used to test your APIs interactively, and also this can be shared with others who are going to consume your API so that they get an understanding about the services that we have implemented, the resources, the query parameters that it accepts. All the information is written in a standardized way in an open API specification. So you could also explore this feature which we have given in Ballerina as well. Okay. So before we move on to the hands-on session, let me just show you where you can learn Ballerina and where you can get support. So I think now most of the time you send messages on the WhatsApp group through Salama. So you can just easily ask questions on Stack Overflow. If it is a simple question, there's a tag called Ballerina in Stack Overflow. Let me just show it to you. You can see my browser screen, the Google tab, right? Can somebody confirm that you're seeing the Google tab?
Yeah, we can see.
Okay. So you can go to Stack Overflow. So I'm just showing you how you can ask questions. So here there's a question about library log, and then here you have to use the tag Ballerina. So then only it will be easily tracked by the Ballerina team, and you will get the answers as quick as possible. So like you can see, we already have questions asked on the Stack Overflow. Similarly, you also can ask questions. And if you think you need to have like a long conversations, not a direct question, then you can reach us on Discord as well. So on Discord also the Ballerina members are very active, and you will get the answers here. So join our Discord channel, and there's a channel called Help Ballerina, which is dedicated for common questions from the users. So you can come over these places and ask questions and get your doubts cleared. Even if your installation is not working, you can just post a screenshot and ask. So any questions of any magnitude can be asked in these platforms. So, and additionally, you can go through the Learn Guide in the Ballerina official website, which has tutorials and the Getting Started guide with all the information about the package management, dependencies, and also how you can write your beginning from writing the first program up until the complex tutorials. You will get all the information in our Learn Guide, and also we have small code snippet based examples where you can learn Ballerina by example. So if you can see, so you can get started with how you can write a hello world mail. You can just simply copy this code and follow the instructions below to try out the code. So we have examples for almost everything, like starting from the hello world, like you can see like how if you are working with some XML data, you can go through the BBs related to that, and also error handling. Then if you're working with since you're working with REST APIs, how you can write a basic REST service and how you send and receive requests and responses, and also other libraries are included. So almost everything is included in this example guide. So you can go through them, and you can always reach us to ask any questions. And additionally, we also have a YouTube training series. So this also contains like small video clips on how to build up REST APIs and go on to make it complex, how you can access the database. So everything is there. You can go through these videos and use them as a reference when you're implementing it. Okay, so like I said, we have Stack Overflow and Discord, and additionally we have the GitHub where you can create issues, and also you can start GitHub discussions as well. So if you come across any issues, or if you want to contribute to an open source project like Ballerina, just go to the GitHub link and make your contributions, and also follow us on Twitter as well. Okay. So before we move on to the actual hands-on exercises, I'll just go through some example case studies which we already shared. So these are some requirements that we have within WSO2 right now, and we usually use Ballerina to implement these. So at the moment, these projects are open. If you want, you can take these case studies and implement. But remember, for the innovation, in the judging criteria for the innovation component, you won't get the complete marks for this. You can only get up to a maximum of 10 marks if you take these case studies. So the first one is a carpooling mobile app that we want to develop. So here what we expect is that uh, there are employees in WSO2 who can register their vehicles, and a few passengers can register to go with this person. So the person who owns the vehicle can register his vehicle, and then he'll be rewarded with money for taking few other people. So there are morning and evening shifts, and they should be able to register their vehicles, and the others should be able to subscribe to that vehicle to take a trip. So for each trip, the registration has to be done separate. That can be done using Ballerina, and also internally, each and every team needs a GitHub statistic dashboard where they can check the pull requests, issue count, a summary of everything that is going on the GitHub repos that we are actively working on, basically. And then in the operations portal app, this is dedicated for things like laptop repairing, laptop replacements, requesting for equipments like monitors and keyboards. And this has to be, there should be an app. This could be a web app or a mobile app. There could be an app to manage this where an employee can add a request, and the admin team has to be able to access through a separate UI and process this request. And the car parking app means we have to manage the parking. We have a limited parking area. So the employees should be able to register their book a parking slot in a parking area, and that has to be managed through an app. And also it also has to contain information like the vehicle information, so that if a vehicle information has to be, if a vehicle has to be moved, it has to be able to track by this app. And the last one is the automatic meeting schedule app. This is a requirement that I have, basically. So we have the student engagement program, and then we have like multiple types of programs that we offer there, like project mentorships, research collaborations, and also conducting workshops. So if someone wants to reach us and schedule and discuss about it, the main way we do is through phone calls. So what I want to do is, so when I give some free slots in my calendar, there should be a web page dedicated this on the connected to the student page, where a set of time slots will be displayed, like 10-minute slot, and the user should be able to click on a select a slot, so that the meeting invite would be sent to me, and the time would be blocked on the user's calendar as well. So you can select, if you want, if you can select one of these 5 case studies and you can complete, and we'll be considering as valid for the competition. So let's move on to the hands-on session. Dharmi, over to you.
Share the screen. I hope you guys can see the browser. Can you see the browser?
Yeah, can see.
Okay. So before going into the coding session, let me explain the scenario we are going to implement. So this is actually a simple social media service which has only one service. So this service can be used to create new posts and retrieve social media posts. In addition to that, you can delete and you can also get posts with some metadata. So that's the functionality of the service, and it can be called from the UI point of view. And in order to store this data, we are going to use a data store. So in the first session, we will be using a Ballerina table in order to store the data. And in the latter session, we will be using a H2 database to store and retrieve the data. In addition to that, we also this service also connect to a third-party endpoint, which is actually a sentiment analysis API. So whenever you are trying to create a social media post with some description, the service itself will connect to this sentiment analysis API, and it will validate the description sentiment. And based on that results, we will be returning different responses from this post resource. So this is the overall view of the scenario we are going to implement. So I'm going to share the GitHub repo that has the skeleton to start with. So let me put it in the chat. Okay, now let me go into the Visual Studio Code. And so this guide has the step-by-step steps to implement the whole scenario. So we have like five different resources as explained before. And we'll start by going through the step-by-step. So the first requirement is to install Ballerina and install VS Code with the Ballerina extension. So make sure you have installed the latest versions of Ballerina, that is 10.0, and you have installed the Ballerina extension. So once you have set up everything, you will see the Ballerina version in the bottom of the VS Code. You can see that here. And let's start by going through the steps. So the first thing is to create a new Ballerina project.
Sorry to interrupt. I think the link is not shared. The project Git link.
Okay, sorry. Now you have the link, right?
Yes.
Okay. So let's start by creating a new Ballerina project. So in order to create a new project, you have to execute this bal new, and then you have to put the name of the project. So I'm going to put it as social media. So once this is done, you go into the Explorer, you can see a folder called social media, which has some initial files. So I'm going to rename this one as service.bal. And let's move into the next step. So the next step is to start with the Ballerina HTTP service with a base path of API. So we have to define a Ballerina HTTP service which contains a base path API. So go to the Ballerina file and let's remove the existing code. So I want a service. So I'll start with service. So you can see there are some suggestions on implemented templates. So you can see you can implement a GraphQL service, you can implement a HTTP service, a gRPC service. So for this case, I'm going with the HTTP one. I'm clicking on that. Then it points to this first place where we are going to put the base path. So the base path is /API. And I'm going to start this listener on port 9090. So once you have done with this template, you can see like this HTTP is already imported. So this is how you can define the HTTP service in Ballerina. So now you have added an HTTP service to your project. So let's go back to the guide again. So the third step, we need to define a Ballerina record to represent the post given in this sample. So here you have the ID, user ID, description, tags, and category. So two of them are integers and all others are string. So we have to define a record to represent this data. So Ballerina is data oriented and it has the first class support to represent data. So I'm going to the directory and I'm just going to make a new file for types. You can even define the type in the same file also. I just wanted to define all the types in a separate file. So here we'll start with the type syntax and it suggests some types. So I want to create a record type. So there are two options. You can either create a closed record or an open record. So what's the difference between closed and open record is when you define a closed record, whatever fields you are provided in the record can only be there in the record creation. An open record can have any other data fields as well. So in this case, I'm going to create a closed record that represent the post. I hope you can see the screen, otherwise I can. Okay. So now you have to define the fields. So we have an integer ID and an integer user ID. And then you have string description and string tags along with string category. So now you have defined a record in Ballerina. And let me go to this sample again. And there is another way to define a record if you have the example JSON. So I'm just copying this. And in VS Code, there's an option called command palettes. So you can access it by Control, Shift, and P. So just search for JSON. And there is one from Ballerina, paste JSON as record. Just click on that. So it will create a record like this. So as you can see, the fields we have defined here and fields we have defined from that action are similar. So here we have, by default, we are generating open records. You can close them as well. So you can either use the normal syntax method to define the record, or you can use this paste JSON as record feature to implement the records easily. Let me go back to the guide. Okay, now we have created the record. Next step is to create a Ballerina table which can store this post, and we have to use this ID field as the key of the table. So let me go back to the service. So here we have to define a table. I'm going to define a table which will contain post, and we should have the key as the ID. And I name it as post table and going to initialize it with an empty value. Give me a minute, I'll reload. Okay, now you can see a red mark here. It actually says that there's a compilation error where the field ID, which is used as a key, must be read-only. So this is because in the table, if you are using ID as a key, you should not allow others to change this ID field by accessing the elements. So in order to make it not accessible after creation, you have to make it as read only. So I'll go back to the types and going to make it read only. So if you come back, now the error is gone. So that's all for creating a table. Let's go back to the guide. And we need to populate these two datas into that table. So these are just like two elements in the table. So I'm just going to copy the entire JSON and going to add it here. Let's add the second one as well. So let me format this document also. Okay. Now you can see like we have defined a post record and given this JSON fields and it works perfectly. Like the data is directly binded to this record. Let's say I change this name to something else, then it gives an error saying this ID field is not found. So at compiler level, we also check whether the structure you are given in the record is same as the value. So we have added two values here. Here the quotations is optional. You can also remove them since they are already defined in the record type. There's no requirement. So I'll just remove them in order to make it simple. Okay, let's go to the next one. So in the next step, we are going to implement a get API post resource, which will retrieve all the posts, and the response should be an array of posts. So let's go back to the service. Inside the service, we have to define a resource. Start with resource, and there are some suggestions. I want to generate a get resource. There are like post, delete, put resources as well. I'm going to click on this get path resource. So here I have to change this path. So since this API is already in the base path, we only have to define the path as post. So then this should returns an array of post. This is what we expect. Now we need to implement the body part. So in order to do that, we have to return. We only have the post table, and somehow from the post table, we need to get it as an array. So in order to do that, there are lang-lib functionalities. Like if you put a dot here, it will suggest some functions. Like there's a toArray method to convert a table into an array. There's a filter method, there's a get method, there's an add method. So likewise, there are lang-lib functionalities. So I'm going to use this toArray method to return the post table. So now we have implemented the very first resource function. So we are going to test it, whether this is working correctly or not. So in order to run it, you can go to the terminal and you can go inside the social media Ballerina project, and then you can run the bal run command. So this will run the service we have defined, and we are going to test this using the Postman since that is more interactive. So I have this get post method, and let's try to send a request and see. So here you can see we have got a 200 OK with a post we have added initially. So this is working as expected. Let me stop the service first and let's try to continue to the next step. So the next step is to extend the get API post resource by adding an optional query parameter category. And if the category parameter is provided, then the resource should return only the post that match the specific category. As we can see, the category is a field in the post record, and we need to have a query parameter to filter this post. So in order to add a query parameter, you can simply add a parameter here, just a string parameter named as category. Then you're saying that you need a category query parameter here. So when you have a type like this, then this query parameter is treated as a required field. That means in every request, you have to send this category. But here we need to make this category as an optional field. And if you don't provide it, we have to send back all the post. So in order to make this as an optional field, we have to say like this can be a string or it can be a null value. So the null representation of Ballerina is defined as nil, and you can define it like string question mark. So in this case, this suggests that the category can be string or it can be a nil value. So in the case of query parameters, if the query parameter is not provided, this category will become a nil value. So now we have to implement the logic here. So what we have to do, we have to check whether category is a string value. If it is a string value, we have to filter this table based on that category and return the values as an array. Otherwise, we have to just send back the post table. So I leave this as an exercise for you guys. So you can clone that repository I have shared, the GitHub repository, and you can check out to this exercise 1 branch, which will have the code template like this, and you can try to implement the filtering part by your own. So let me check if there is any questions. Okay. So let me continue to the next step. So in the next step, we are going to implement a API post/ID where we are going to retrieve a specific post which is given by its ID. So this is known as a path parameter where post represent all the post resources and you are specifying a specific ID to notify a specific post. So we have to retrieve that specific post, and sometimes this ID can be an invalid ID where we don't have a post. So in that case, we have to send a 404 not found status code response. So let's go back to the service. And now I want to add a get resource function. We should start with post and slash. Then there should be a path parameter that I need to access here. So in order to do that, I need the type of the path parameter. So the parameter type is integer. The ID is integer. So I'm just going to put int ID here. So what this means is whatever comes after post will be mapped to this ID. So we can access that number using this ID variable. So when you're sending this, we need to return a post, specific post with this ID, or if the post not found, we have to send a HTTP not found response. So in order to send status code responses in Ballerina, you can use HTTP status code responses. So in HTTP package, there are several status code responses. So we need not found. So there are not acceptable, not implemented, not modified. There are a lot of status code responses. So we are going to just need the not found status code response. So this means whenever you get a GET request with post / an integer ID, we are going to return a post or a HTTP not found. So in the logic, what we have to check is, we have to check whether that table has this key first. So I'm going to check if post table has this key ID. So if the key is already there, we just have to return it, right? So we have to return post table dot get that post. Now we have, like, if the ID is there, we are sending back the HTTP that post. So if it is not there, we have to return this HTTP not found error response here. So in order to return that, so in the step, it doesn't say what should be the body of this not found response or something. So we are going to just send a response without any body. So that you can do by using the predefined constant in the HTTP. So what this constant will do is, it will send back a 404 response without any body. So we have defined the business logic here. You can also simplify this logic if you are aware of conditional expressions. So I'm just going to copy this, and we has key. What you should do is, you should get the post and return. Otherwise, you return a not found response. So we don't need this. Now the API looks simpler. So you can also use like several other expressions as well. Like there's like Ballerina support query expressions also. So you can go through the Ballerina by examples in the website to know about all these things. So let's check whether this is working. So I'll go to the terminal and going to run the bal run command again. So it will compile and start to run.
Just an error. I mean, just an error.
Sorry, was there any question? Okay. So let's check. Let's check the existing API. It's sent. Okay, it's giving the results. Let's go to guest post by ID. Okay, I'm giving the ID as 1 here and try to get the first one. And you can see we have received the data as expected. Let's try to put some invalid number like 10. There's no post associated with this ID 10. So what I expected is a 404 not found here. Let's send it. And as expected, we are receiving a 404 not found without any body. So that's the, we have completed this step. So we have sent a status code response without any body. So let's go to the next step. In the meantime, I'll check whether there's any chat. Okay, so there was a question asking the difference between this and this. Okay, so HTTP not found is a type, and HTTP with all capitals is just a value, a constant value defined in HTTP. This is to just send back a not found status code response without anybody. In the latter section, we will look how we can construct different status code response with body. So I'll go to the next step. So we need to define a record to represent new post request. So there's already an example JSON. So I'm going to copy this. And I'm going to use the Control-Shift-P and paste JSON as record. And here now I got the new record. I change it as new post and make this record a closed one. Okay. So we have defined a new post request to represent the request payload. So let's go back to this next step. Next step is to define a status code response record to represent 201 created response. And we need to define the body, which is same as the post one. So let's look how we can do that. So we need a record. So I named it as post created. This is a record. So the status code record should be generated as a closed records. And we have to specify which type of status code response this represents. So in order to do that, you can use this included syntax. We give HTTP and we give the created status code response here. So when you create a record like this, whenever you are returning it from the resource, HTTP actually treat this as a status code response, and it's send back the response aligned with this specification to you define here. So in this case, it will send back as a 201 created response, and then you need to define the type of the body as post. So that you can use by defining the post type. Define the field as body. So this body field represents the response body, and you are defining it as a type of post. So this is how you can create status code responses with some body data. Let's go back to the next step. Okay, now we have to implement a post resource with API post resource. So this should be posts, and it should create the post data is provided in the request payload, and it should return the status code response created in the previous step. So let's go back to the service. Let's define a post resource. So going to have posts, and then we have to access the request payload with a type of new post. So in the request, it is given in this format where we don't have the ID. So we have to automatically generate the ID and create a post resource and add it to the table. So let's go back to this service, and I want to access the payload directly from here. So you can just put new post here. So when you have this, we will bind the request payload to this variable new post. And once this is done, you have to return post created. Okay, now let's try to implement this one. So we already have all the fields to construct the post in the new post. The missing one is an ID. So we have to get the ID from the table. Here the table has a key ID. So we need to know what is the next key when we are adding this new post. So you can use the post tables and you can see there's a functionality called next key. So this next key returns the next available integer key in the table. So I'm going to use that. And this value is an integer, I have to assign it. So here you can see there's this bulb icon where you can find the quick fixes. So I'm going to create a variable and name it as ID. So now we have the ID. Let's construct a post resource from here. So the post one will have the ID field, which is be generated, and it should have the user ID, which we need to access from the new post. So we put new post and we can put dot and access this user ID. And then we need to get the description from the new post. And the tags. And finally, the category. Okay, now we have constructed the post. So the next step, we have to add it to the table. So we'll just put post tables dot add the new value. New post. Once this is done, we have to return a response. So the response should be a post created where the body is actually the post. So you can just return a JSON which will have a body, and body should have all these fields. We can replace it with a post. Now we have implemented the post resource as well. Here, like in Ballerina, if you have the key and the value as the same field, then you can simply say just ID. That means this ID variable name will be used for the field name. And then you are getting all these same fields from the new post and trying to add it to this post user ID, description, and tags and category. Rather than that, you can just copy all the other fields from the new post and add it here. So that can be done by simply using this spread operator, where you can actually use all the resource, all the fields from the new post and add it to this ID. So let me check what's the course record. I will go to window. Let's try to build it and okay, there was an additional dot there. Okay, so you only need 3 dots here and spread it. So all the fields from the new post will be copied to this post record, and you need to make sure that the new post is like a closed record and there's no conflicts when we are copying the fields. So the new post should not have the same ID, then we cannot copy it. So let's try to run this and see. I'm going to run this. And let's check the old APIs as well. Okay, we get 1 and 2. Let's try to get the 1. We are getting it. Let's try to get the third one, which is not there. We get the not found error. We go to create post. So here, this is the URL and we are going to send this data. Let's try to send this and see. Yeah, it says 201 created and it generate a post response with the generated ID. So this is 3. So let's go back and try to access this again. Okay, now it's working. Now the all the 3 resources are working as expected. Let me quickly check if there are any questions. Okay. So now the next one is to implement a delete resource, which will have the ID in the path, just like the get post with ID. And we need to delete that specific post from the table. And once that is done, we are going to return a 204 no content. So here it doesn't say whether we need to check whether the post is exist or not. We just have to try to execute the delete command. So whatever happens, we are just returning a 200 no content. That means it doesn't have any body. So this part I'll leave you as a next exercise. So you can check out to exercise 2 branch and try to implement the delete resource inside the service. So let's go to the next step. So in the next step, we have to define a Ballerina record to represent the post data with some metadata. So this is what it looks like. Here we are moving these tags and category to meta. So this is just a simple mapping. It can be like in real use cases, it can be different, but we need to manipulate whatever we have into a different format. So we called it as a data mapper. So we need to map like this post data to this structure. So I'm just going to first create a record to represent this post with metadata. I'll just copy and go back to types and Control Shift P and paste JSON as record. As you can see, this one has like 2-level JSON, right? It has a meta field, which is also a JSON. So Ballerina defines a separate record for this and a record to represent the entire thing. So this is the representation for meta record. So I'll just make this as post as well. And we are going to name it as post with meta. Okay, now we have defined the types. Let's go to the next step. So in the next step, we have to define a data mapper. So actually here is the action happening. We have to convert the post to this post with metadata. So as you can see, the tags should be converted to an array by splitting with a comma. So this is just a simple use case. It might be different from other use cases. So we'll try to first implement this and try to implement this data mapper function. So I'll go to the functions and now I have to create a function which takes the post as an input and it should output this post with meta. So I'm going to define a function. There are several suggestions. I'm going to use this arrow expression. So let's see what this does. I want to transform post. And the input of the function is post. And what we expect is post with metadata. So what does this arrow function means is we don't need a body. We are going to define the return type directly here. So this should be actually a record, right? So we are going to return a post with metadata. So it has ID field. So it should come from post.id. It has user ID, which comes from post from .user ID. And it has a description that also we copy from the description. And we have meta. I'm just going to remove these. And let's add the category first. Category is same as post category. And what we need to change is only this tags. So tags in the post is just a string value. We have to convert it to an array by splitting it by the comma. So to do that, I'm going to use the regular expressions and split method here. So in order to define a regular expression, you can define RE, and this template represents the regular expression. So here it is not that much a regular expression, is just a comma. So it can be different for other use cases. So we are going to use this, and there's a split method. And we have to pass the post dot tags. Then the post tags will be splitted here. So this is actually the transform function. And you can see there's a, like in VS Code, this is known as a code lens, like visualize here. So let's click on that and see what happens. So if you go to this one, I hope you can see the screen. So actually it shows the mapping you have done in the function as a diagram. So this is useful when you are trying to explain the mapping to someone. Yeah, we are copying these fields with this one, and there's a transformation between tags and this string array. And this diagram and the code can be like interchangeable. Like if you do a change in the diagram, it will be reflected in the code. And if you do any change in the code, it will be reflected in the diagram as well. So that this thing can be also used to explain your functionalities to others. Okay, now we have defined this transform function. And now we need to implement this get API post with ID and metadata. And we have to return the post specified by ID by adding the metadata. That is just simply transforming the post with post with metadata. So when the ID, the post is not found or the ID is invalid, you have to return a 404 not found response. Here also you don't need to pass any body or something. So that one also I have like let you guys implement. So this is like the path where it covers path parameters, status code responses, and the transform function we have already defined. So you can like check out to this exercise 3 in the GitHub repository, and you can try out and try to implement this resource, and you can run the Ballerina program and try to execute this and see whether you are getting the correct response. So now we have like implemented like all the resource functions specified in this diagram. So some of them are left for you guys to implement. And let's go to the next step. So in the next step, Let me check if there's any questions. Yeah. So in the next step, we are going to define a Ballerina HTTP client to call this sentiment analysis service. And the service can be run by running this sentiment API Ballerina project that is also available in in the GitHub repository. And the service will be starting in localhost 9000/API. So let me just go through this. So this is the sentiment API endpoint. So it's just a mock service. So let's look what it does. So here we have a service, and in the service we have a post resource, and it has a sentiment path, and there's a content, and there's a return type. So it's not direct to understand this if you don't know the Ballerina code. So there's a visualize option. So let's try that out, what it does. So here you can see this says like you have a service on base path API, and there's a sentiment resource. So if you click on it, it will say like it requires a body which is of type content, and this is the definition of that. And you have the response, which is a 201 with a sentiment record, which is a JSON with probability and label content. So you can also try to visualize the service we have implemented. If you have completed all the 6 resources, you can try to visualize and see whether it matches the diagram we have given in the README. So to run, first, let's run the sentiment API first. I'll go to the terminal. I go to sentiment API and run bell run. So it is getting compiled. Now it says like sentiment analysis service has been started. So this has been started. Now we have to define an HTTP client which should be connected to this localhost 9000/API path. So let's go back to the service. So I'm going to define the service, the HTTP client inside the service itself, because that client should be up and running in order to run the service. So I'm going to just define it inside. You can also define it outside as well. So I'll put it as, so we'll start with HTTP, and there's this client, and we call it sentiment client. Okay. Now we need to initialize this. So in order to initialize it, inside the service function, you can construct this init function. So what does init function does? It will initialize everything that is required for this service. So I'm going to initialize the self.sentiment client, which is an HTTP client. So you can start by new, and then you have to provide the URL. So the URL is HTTP localhost 9000/API. So this is the URL, right? Okay. Now it shows an error. It says like what you are expecting is a client, but you are having in the right-hand side is a client or error. Yes. So when you are trying to make a connection to this API, there can be issues in the connection. So those issues are returned as error in Ballerina. So Ballerina don't hide the error, it just return the error from this initialization. So in order to, you can either get the error in the left-hand side, or you can just put check here. So what it does is it will try to make the connection, client connection here. If there's an error, it will just return it from this point. So if you are returning an error from here, then the init function should return an error also. So you can, if you go to the quick fix, you can see changing the return type to error or nil is an option. So now when you try to initialize this service, it will try to initialize this client. And if there's an issue in trying to connect to that client, there will be an error. So that error will be returned from the service init function, which will ideally close the service. So the init function can also return an error, or it will return nothing as nil value. So we have defined a sentiment client here. Let's go back to the next step. So in the next step, we have to define a record to represent the sentiment analysis response. As you saw in the sentiment analysis service overview, you see like it was sending some label and probabilities. So we have to create a record to capture that analysis response. So I'm just going to copy this and going to paste it here. Let's put it here. Control Shift V and paste JSON as record. Okay, now I just make this as close records. You can have it as open as well. That's fine. And I'm going to name this record as, let's say, sentiment. Okay, now we have created a record to represent the response from the sentiment API. So let's go back. And now it says we have to modify this post API post resource to validate the sentiment of the post by calling this sentiment analysis post resource, that is /sentiment, with a post description with this format. So this should be in the body, and we have to give the post description in this format. Then we will get some sentiment response back from that client. So based on the sentiment, we have to do some logic here. If the sentiment label is equal to negative, then we have to send a 404 bad request status code response. So let's try to implement that. Go to the post resource. Okay, so here we are creating the post. So before that, we have to check. So I'm going to invoke this sentiment client, and I want to invoke a sentiment resource. So in order to do that, you can start with this arrow slash and then put sentiment here. So this means you are accessing /sentiment resource of this sentiment client API, and you wanted to make a post request. So in order to notify that, you have to put dot, and then you say, I'm going to make a post request. Then you have to provide the body for the post request. So the body here is, you have to pass text, which equals to new post dot description. Okay, so this one will make a request to this sentiment client and will try to get the response. But in the response part, as we mentioned earlier, there are status code response, there are headers and payload. So here you only want the payload part. So that you can do by just putting what you expect is sentiment and put sentiment in equals. So you are going to try to get whatever response body we are getting from here and try to bind it to this sentiment type. So here it says an error because what expected is sentiment, but this can also return an error. So we are just going to put the check expression here. So in order to, like, if we are using check expression, we have to return that error here. Okay. Now, if there's anything goes wrong from the sentiment client, it will return an error. Then the error will be returned from this resource function. So whenever there's an error returned from a resource function, HTTP service by default convert that to a internal server error. That is a status code response to represent something went wrong in the backend. So by default, when you are returning an error, we will be converting that to an internal server error. So now we have this sentiment. Then we'll check if sentiment dot label, if it is equal to negative, then what should we do? We have to return a bad request error. So we have to add bad request also here. I'll just add HTTP bad request. So now it can return post created HTTP bad request or some internal server error when there's an error happens when we are invoking the sentiment API. So here we have to return. So here also we didn't specify what is the body of the bad request. So we are just going to return HTTP bad request, which is a constant. Okay, now we have done it, but here you can see there's an error. So this error says ambiguous type. So what does that mean is now you have two different status code responses which can have like a similar structure. So in order to like avoid these conflicts, you have to explicitly say this part is post created. So you can do that by casting this to post created. So now we have done the post resource as well. So let us check the implementation. So I'll go to the terminal part. Sentiment API is already running. Let's go to social media and try to run this. Okay, social media is running. Let's go to the postman and let's try to get it. Yeah, we are receiving the requests and we'll try to get the post one. It's getting. Let's try to get the post number 3, which is not there, not found. Let's try to create a new post by sending this one. Okay, it is also created. Let's try to check whether we are getting that. Yes, we are getting everything here. So yeah, that's all the resources and the HTTP client part. So the other next step is to generate clients using OpenAPI specification. As we implemented this service, this client, you have noticed like all the response and request mapping are mentioned in the guide, right? So this is the format you have to send, and this is the format you are going to receive. It's already mentioned in this guide. So what does OpenAPI specification do is it's just represent all the necessary data to invoke this service in a specification format. So you can use this OpenAPI specification with Ballerina to generate a client code. So this is more like an advanced case. You can refer to this OpenAPI tool and try to generate the sentiment analysis client using this OpenAPI specification. Then you can use that client instead of this HTTP client to make the request. So that also I'll leave it to you. If you want to explore more, you can check it out, our OpenAPI tool as well. And you can replace the HTTP client with a generated client and check the post resource as well. So the next step is something important, like debugging your Ballerina program. So now we have implemented these services. So there is like when you are implementing the business logic, it is most common to debug the program to see whether it is working as expected. So that part I'm going to explain next. So we are going to run this Ballerina application in the debug mode and try to check some APIs. So for example, I'm going to check this post resource function, and I'm going to put a breakpoint here to check what is the actual value of sentiment here. And in order to run this in debug mode, you can either run the debug code lines here, or you can run the run and debug option here as well. So I'm just going to run this code lines. So it says started and it's compiled and started. So let's first check some other API first. Let's check post one. So this is we are getting, and there's no debug point reached because we have added it the create post. So let's try to make a request to that resource and see whether it is hitting. Yes, as expected, it reached this point. So at this point, you can see here what are the variables you have. So this is the entire new post which is made in the request, and you also have this request response from the sentiment API where you can see the label and all the probability. So here also you can observe the variables here, or else at the bottom of this debug console, if you can see the cursor, you can evaluate expressions as well. For example, I want to check sentiment dot label here. If I enter, it will show it is as positive. So you can go to next step and then you can continue. So likewise, here also we have reached the response as well. Likewise, you can debug your Ballerina program as well. I'm going to stop the debug here.
Dharmi, there's a question in the chat.
Okay, let me check. What happens if it doesn't return an error, but another object with a different shape? Yeah, okay, so let me explain that as well. Okay, so in here, so the question was, let's say this sentiment API is returning some other record, which is not of this type. So when you say you are expecting sentiment, internally what we do is we get the response payload and we try to convert it to this sentiment type. So if there's an error happen there, it will also return as an error. So it will be returned as a payload binding error. For example, you can, I'll just explain a bit of error handling here. So let's say you want to handle that error here, then you can put a do block here and on fail clause with an error. So what does this expression means is we are trying to do something here, and on the fail you are trying to do something else here. So we have to actually put all of these to the do block. And let me format this. Okay, So now you have done like the positive case is handled here. So on fail, there can be different errors. Like mentioned, there can be client errors. There can be a payload binding error as well. So here you can actually check if this error is a type of payload binding error. So this payload binding error is added in the HTTP side. So there's a payload binding error here, and you can actually handle it separately here. And for all the other cases, you can handle it differently here also. Like you can check the payload binding here. And there are like in some cases, you don't know what is the actual structure they are sending, but you know they are sending just a JSON. So in that case, you can just find this as JSON. So in that case, we will only verify whether you are getting a JSON payload here. Additionally, there are like other options, like you can get the entire response message here. And from the response message, you can actually get the JSON payload or text payload based on the content type. You can get different payload, get XML payload. You can get different payload by accessing the response object as well. So it's actually an advanced case. If you have a requirement like that, you can use that as well. Let me take it back to what we have. Format this. Okay. So if there's no other questions, so that's the end of session 1. So we are going to start the session 2. Okay, there was a question. HTML parsing. I'm not sure about that. You can get the HTML content if it is sent as a text payload. So we need to check the content type of that. You can like anyway ask these type of questions in our Discord channel, and we will be happy to reply. Should we arrange this to cost?
Can be asked on Stack Overflow.
Yes. Because I developed this. We arrange this to host. It's fine. Okay, can you hear me now? Sure, there was an audio issue. Can you hear me?
Yes, we
Okay.
can.
Okay.
Is there a different repo for this, or is it the same repo that?
Yeah, the same repo. So for session 2, it's mostly like we are going to convert this in-memory table we are using to an in-memory H2 database actually. So in order to start with an H2 database, we need to import some libraries. So it is given here. I'm just going to import these things. So you have to import the SQL library, which will give you a flexibility of writing queries and everything. And in order to use the H2 database, you need the JDBC DB connector. And in order to make the connection, you need the database driver. So this one provide the H2 database driver. So just to add it as a resource, you just say as underscore. So this is added as a driver resource here. And you may get some like error saying like this is not found. And then there's this, if you click on the bulb icon to so the code action, it will suggest to you to pull all the libraries that are not found. So if you get that error, you'll try to pull all those libraries. So now we are going to define a JDBC, actually a SQL client in place of that Ballerina table. So this gives some like configurations to add. So we are going to use a file store to store the data in H2 database, and it gives the post name and the fields and all those things. So let me start by creating a SQL client here. I'm going to define SQL client. I call it as DB client. And let's try to initialize it. DB client, which is equal to, I'm going to create a new JDBC client actually. JDBC client, and I need to provide the URL. So URL is this one. So we give the path as dot. Okay. Now here also like you can get some errors while trying to create the database. So you put a check here. So if there's an error when connecting to the database, actually this init function will fail, so that the service will fail as well. So now we have this JDBC client. So let's go back to this code, and it says like we need to create the table if it does not exist. So let's do that as well. I'm going to define a function here to init database, and I'm going to pass an SQL client here. I call this as DB client, and then I have to like execute some query to generate the table. So I'm going to use DB client, and then you can have this execute, and then you have to provide the query to create the table. So I'm just going to copy this query. So when you are providing the query, you have to put it in between the backticks. So this is how you find the query. So we are going to create a table if not exist. The table name is post, and these are the IDs. And yeah, and now this can also return an error. So we'll put a check here. So this can return an error as well. So it says variable assignment is required. You can click on that. So I'm just creating the table. I am not interested in the result of this execution. So I'm going to ignore this return. So when if it is successfully executed, that would be enough. So I'm going to call this one here init db, and I'm going to pass self.db client. Okay. Now we have initialized the table here. As you can see, can return an error or nil. So it's saying we have to check here also. We'll make sure that if there's an error happens when creating the table also, the service will fail. So we have initialized the database. Okay. Now let's go back to this one. Okay. Now what we are going to do is we are going to store this post record into this fields according to these fields. So here the fields are like ID, user ID are defined differently. So that we have to utilize this one and saying like when you are trying to execute something with that post resource, you have to say if it is a database thing, you have to use this field name to actually check the column name. So for that, you can just add an annotation here. So you can import SQL and say column, and then you can specify the name as ID. So the same thing we will be using here as well. Okay.
The meeting link will end by 8:30. It seems. Can we wrap up in 10 minutes?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. If there's anything, then we can push it to the next session.
Okay. Yeah, sure. So let's first try to like change this one. So here what we have to do is we have to return all the posts from the database. So we have to like use the self DB client and we can execute. So we need to select everything from posts and we have to like make a query. So when we query this, it will return a stream. Like it will stream some data from this post table. So we'll change the row type. This is post. And we make this as post stream. Okay. Now we have to consume this stream and collect all the posts as an array. So that you can do by using this query expressions. So you can use from post in the post streams. What you need is you need to select all the post and you just have to return that. So here also like the stream can have post or it can return an error as well. So in that case, we will be returning an error here. So this is actually the get post. And for resource functions, get integer ID also. Here also it's similar to this. You have to make a query, but you can use this self.db client where you make query row. So this actually return one row of the results. So you can put like select everything from post where ID equals to the ID given in this parameter. So you have to extract the parameter and add it to this query string. So that you can do by evaluating dollar and then ID. Then the value of ID will be added in the query expression. So this one you can assign it to post. And when you query row, you go to the query row, it says like if the query does not return any value, there's a no rows error returned from this function. So when this is an error, that means there's no post matching this query. So in that case, we have to return this not found error. So you can change this logic as if post is type of post. You return the post or you return the HTTP not found. Yeah, so I think we are close to the time. So you can try to implement the post resource as well. And I have given the guides for you guys to check out these PBs. And you can try to implement this and the other resource function as well. We will also commit the entire code to that repository. We will give you some time to go through the exercises and the implementation. So yeah, that's the end of the session. Let me stop the sharing and see whether there's any questions. Okay, if you have any questions, okay, there's a question in how can we connect to MongoDB? So let me share that as well quickly. Mm, mm. I hope you can see my screen. So if you go to the Ballerina Central and you can check for keyword database, you can see a lot of databases here. Like you can have Ballerina, Redis, MongoDB, some other thing. And if you go to the MongoDB connector, then you have a guide to how to set up this locally and how to run this server and how to import the module and how to uh, invoke the connector operations. You can check this out in the central repository as well. So there's a lot of connectors in the Ballerina Central. You can check there as well. Okay. There is any other questions you can ask? If there's no questions, we can conclude the session, I think, Asma.
Yeah, so if you want anything else to be covered in the second session, that you think we missed in this session, so just let us know through the organizing committee so that we can see if we can cover those in the next session, or we might also be able to have a dedicated session to address other concerns of yours as well, other than the stuff that we are going to cover in the second session. So, is there any more questions? And of course, you can always reach us through Discord and Stack Overflow. So Stack Overflow would be preferred more if it is a direct question. So keep asking questions there, and the team members will answer you. So because we are not experts in all the areas in Ballerina, so I can answer package questions related to the package management, and Dharmi is from the library team. So if you ask questions on Discord and Stack Overflow, so then the subject experts will answer you, so you will get the best answer from them. Yeah, so then over to you, Chamudi. We can end the session like this.
Hi, sorry for the inconvenience. Thank you, Chamudi, and thank you so much, Asma and Tharmigan, for your valuable contribution. And yeah, let's conclude the session right now. Please accept the token of appreciation. And yes, thank you everyone for joining. Let's conclude the session now.